And then the FBI a few years ago remember they were going around to librarians. And they're asking librarians to report on people who visited the library and took out strange books, or people who visited the library who had foreign accents, or who in some way looked suspicious, or foreign-sounding names. I had this vision that Brzezinski would visit a library and be reported to the FBI. But those FBI, CIA, the things they do have chilling effects on freedom of speech. Once a CIA official was asked about the CIA's activities, which they're outside their charter, illegal. They're not supposed to be doing domestic surveillance. And the CIA official was asked, but what about the First Amendment? And the CIA officer replied, it's only an amendment. I mean, such is the arrogance of power.
Thank you. Let me interject. There was one Balkan politician who in the mid-19th century said, laws are for the opponent.
Laws are for
the opponent.
Laws are for the opponent?
For the political opponent.
For the political opponent. Suppose you did not have this problem that I just talked about, the problem that your freedom of speech is restricted by people with power over you, or that you were deterred or intimidated in some way by forces of government from expressing yourself. Suppose you were uninhibited in expressing yourself. There would still be a very fundamental problem of free speech. The problem would be the problem of information. That is, to put it another way, suppose you have a perfect right to say what you want without fear of punishment, but you have nothing to say. That is, you have nothing to say because you don't know what's going on. You don't know what to say about the Middle East. You don't know what to say about the Gulf. You don't know what to say about Vietnam. You don't know what to say about Nicaragua. You don't know what to say. There's nothing for you to say because you don't know what's happening there. You've got to have information in order to really have freedom of speech. You have to have something to talk about. Therefore, you have to live in a society in which information is freely available on all of these subjects. Otherwise, democracy is based on the accessibility of information. Now, you may say, or someone may say, well, surely that's not a problem. This is the United States of America. We have more information than anybody in the world. We have more newspapers, we have more books, we have more radios. We have People magazine. We have a lot of information. We have an educated country, there's some truth to that. But it's also true that we are deprived of a lot of important information by government secrecy and government deception. There are some things that the government does which the government doesn't tell us about, has never told us about, and which the media never found out about, or in some cases where the media found out about it, the media chose to go along with the government and not tell us about it. And so the government withheld information about about what was going on in Vietnam. And once you withhold information, you can lie about the reality because the people don't have the information to counteract that lie. I mean, when the Pentagon Papers came out, remember the official history of the Vietnam War, which was not supposed to be seen by the public, based on the inner memoranda of government officials during the Vietnam War, and then it was illegally leaked, sent out to the newspapers and to the public by a couple of intrepid people who had worked on the report, Daniel Ellsberg and Anthony Russo. Well, the Pentagon Papers revealed that the government was withholding things from us because there they were talking frankly. It was a secret document. The public would never get it. So they could say in this, the South Vietnamese government was essentially the creation of the United States. Now, publicly they were saying the South Vietnamese government is an independent government. It is under attack. We are going to support the integrity and self-determination of the South Vietnamese government. But behind the backs of the public, they were saying to themselves, we created this government. And they're our boys. And we will do what we want. Even that will determine what happens. The government withheld information from us. The government lied about the invasion of Cuba, the attempted invasion of Cuba in 1961, the Bay of Pigs. President Kennedy lied about it. Secretary of State Rusk lied about it. They lied about the Gulf of Tonkin episode in 1964. They lied about the mining of the Nicaraguan harbors in the 1980s. If the government lies, if the government deceives in the Iran-Contra affair, well, we know deception. And Casey, head of the CIA, saying, no third country has been approached for funds. Then it turns out Casey himself approached third country for funds and so on. So how are we supposed to exercise our right of freedom of speech, our right to criticize what is going on if we don't know what is going on? Well, the examples multiply. And the media, information from the media, well, yeah, you can get some information from the media. But you really have to go around to the boundaries, to the margins of the media. You have to go to little newspapers and little magazines and leaflets handed out by funny-looking people on the street to get information that you won't get in official channels. Because NBC and CBS and ABC, they will tell you exactly the same things, right? You change the channel from ABC to NBC to CBS, it's all the same. It's as if they're reporting the weather. Time, Newsweek, U.S. News, and so on. All you have to do is look at the coverage of the Gulf War. Well, Ramsey Clark will talk about that, I assume, but the media has not played the role of a powerful, independent voice, the voice that Thomas Jefferson thought that journalism should play in representing the voice of the citizenry against the government. And then there's the problem of resources. That is, suppose you have information. Suppose you've learned as much as you can, and it's possible to learn. People did learn what was going on in Vietnam. They didn't learn it from the government, and for a long time they didn't learn it from the major media. They learned about the My Lai massacre not from the New York Times, but from a little news service in Southeast Asia run by a few little sort of radical journalists, one of them being Seymour Hersh, who later was taken up by the New York Times, and they leaked the story of the My Lai massacre. But sure, there are ways to get information if you try hard, and it's not a totalitarian country. It is possible, but it's hard. But you need then the resources to disseminate this information. Freedom of speech is not just qualitative, it's quantitative. It's not just a matter of do you have freedom of speech or do you not have freedom of speech. It's a question of how much freedom of speech do you have? How many people can you reach? I can stand up on a soapbox on the street. This is a sort of classic picture of an American exercising his right of free speech. I will stand up on a soapbox on the street corner and I can say whatever I want. Well, maybe, depending on who the cop is on the corner. But yes, I can stand up on the soapbox and reach 100 people. Procter & Gamble, which made the soapbox, can reach 20 million people by their influence in the media and so on. So resources, dollars, money, yes. How much speech you have depends on how much money you have. So these are problems of freedom of speech. How are they overcome? Well, not by passing another law, not by having another Bill of Rights, not even by having a different Supreme Court, although it would be good to have a different Supreme Court. I'm not arguing against having a First Amendment or a Constitution or a good Supreme Court. I'm arguing against relying on those things and suggesting that if we want freedom of speech, if we want our rights, if we want that panoply of good things that the Bill of Rights promises, that we will have to get them ourselves. The novelist Aldous Huxley said, "Liberties are not given, they are taken." That's not a theft. That's democracy. That is, people have to demand their rights. People have to take risks for their right. People have to divulge information when they're not supposed to divulge information. They have to be whistleblowers when they may face loss of their jobs. But that's what we've depended upon in our country. We've depended on people to take risks. We've depended on people to, yes, violate the rules and violate the law in order to get information out or to bring things to other people's attention. People to commit civil disobedience, yes, people to go to jail in order to dramatize something that's going on and bring it to the attention of others, to exercise free speech in every possible way, to look for alternate media, to look for other ways of gaining information and spreading information and playing a part in all of that. Now that's much more difficult than just relying on the First Amendment and on the Supreme Court. And, a lot of people think, well, that's not what democracy is. The job has been done for us. The Founding Fathers did it. And all we have to do is sit back and relax. But not so. It's a hard message to convey that we can't relax. Well, we can for a few hours here and there. But basically, we have a job as citizens to take the risks and use the energy and organize with others in order to gain the rights that are promised in the Bill of Rights, in order to move the wheel of justice forward and make it a good society. Thank you.
Unfortunately, there is a logical inconsistency in the term of freedom of speech. And if I have freedom of speech, I'm using that freedom, I can tell you that you should not have a freedom of speech. I can say, don't talk, don't speak, because I'm using my freedom of speech to tell you. So really, freedom of speech is self-contradictory. Using freedom of speech, I will tell you that you should not have freedom of speech.
Well,
so inevitably, it has to depend on power, inevitably. Because I will tell you, you cannot speak, you should shut up, and I'm using my freedom of speech to tell you that. You will tell me, you should shut up, and whoever is more powerful, unfortunately, will win. So I do not think that there is any utopian state where there will be freedom of speech, and those people who struggle for freedom of speech, they will create their own dictatorship of speech later. Those people there. So it's logically self-contradictory, and it all depends on the power.
Well,
I said, I can tell you, don't talk, don't speak, shut up. I'm using my freedom of speech.
yes, I understand. Did you hear what the man said? No, it's very interesting. It's talking about the self-contradictory nature of freedom of speech, that he may use his freedom of speech to tell me to shut up, that he may use his freedom of speech to suggest that I shouldn't have freedom of speech. Well, he didn't exactly say to use his freedom of speech to stop my freedom of speech. That is, I suppose, if he shouted me down and didn't allow me to speak, then that you could argue that he's using his freedom of speech. You might argue to suppress my freedom of speech. He's pointing to the self-contradictory nature of freedom of speech and also to the fact that, freedom of speech, yes, it's a matter of power, and the people who demand freedom of speech and then get it, and they get power, then they become oppressive to other people and oppress their freedom of speech. And there's a lot of truth in what you say, except that I'm not quite as pessimistic about the situation. You are. I can see. But it's all right if it's all right, I think, and it's a proper exercise of freedom of speech for you to say whatever you want to, even to say that I should be denied freedom of speech. However, if you actually deny my freedom of speech, then you're not simply exercising freedom of speech, you're doing something more than that, and then it becomes repugnant. As for the problem of people gaining power, or people demanding freedom of speech and then using their newly gained power to suppress others, of course we've seen that happen again and again in history. And and I agree, that's a difficult problem. There's no utopian solutions. It's a never-ending struggle in which people try to get rights for themselves, and then very often in that new situation, new tyrants arose, new tyrannies arise, and then you face the problem, doing it again. Your children have the same problem that you had, and your grandchildren have the same problem you have. And yes.
Can you comment on the traditional view of history, like it was Henry Kissinger who said history is the story of states, as opposed to your version of history being the people's history of the United States?
By the way, one of the critical elements in freedom of speech is to go outside the agenda. Did you know? If if I were to say to you, look, I'm sorry, we're discussing the Bill of Rights, and you're asking me a question about history and this and that. No. But no, really, there's a way in which freedom of speech is stifled by procedural controls, or by, this is not the occasion. This is not the moment. This is what we're here for. These are the points on the agenda. You're out of order, right? The man shows up in church when Bush is, remember, the Bush is going to church in the war. The man shows up in church with a placard or something saying, "Stop the war." The policeman hustle it. Freedom of speech in church? Who do you think you are? It's not on the agenda. Right. So, yeah, I will go. I just had to use that opportunity, right? Did you hear what he... You didn't hear what he... Oh, you thought I was done. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry for misleading you into thinking I was done. But I will be done. It may seem as if I will never be done, but I will. But he asked me a question about history. This will only take about an hour. About people's history. Well, I'll just say this, that I don't know how many of you, I won't ask how many of you are familiar with my book of People's History, because it will only embarrass me if nobody raises their hands, right? And will show me up for what I am, a writer of an unread book. But I wrote this book of People's History of the United States, and the idea of it was to tell the history of the United States from the standpoint of people who have been left out of the traditional histories. And my point was that in general, history has been told from the standpoint of people in power, from the standpoint of the founding fathers, from the standpoint of, in fact, the titles of chapters and texts and topics, the age of Jackson, the age of Lincoln, the age of Roosevelt, told, from the standpoint of presidents. In fact, there's one man who wrote a book for teachers, a guidebook for teachers who teach history. This guy is telling other teachers how to teach history, so he's a master teacher. And he's explaining to them what he does as an example of what should be done. He says, when I teach American history, I cover the walls around the classroom with all the photographs of every American president. And then I go through them one by one. When I read this, you mean Martin Van Buren is on your wall? You know, Franklin Pierce is on your wall? I mean, Gerald Ford is on your wall? I mean, that's what... Anyway, I decided I would tell the story of Columbus from the standpoint of the Indians. I would tell the story of the colonial period from the standpoint of black slaves and from the standpoint of white workers and rebellious farmers, not from the standpoint of the founding fathers at the Constitutional Convention, from the standpoint of the Revolutionary Army GIs who marched on the Continental Congress and forced the Continental Congress to get out of their headquarters because these GIs were disgusted with the fact that they were treated so badly. To tell the story of the Mexican War from the standpoint of the Mexicans, or from the standpoint of the American GIs who went to fight in the Mexican War and then wondered what they were fighting for and deserted. Tell the story of the Industrial Revolution from the standpoint of the Irish and Chinese immigrants who worked on the railroads, not from the standpoint of Carnegie and Vanderbilt and Morgan and Chauncey Depew and all of those characters, you know, the heroes of the Gilded Age, but from the standpoint of the people who worked and suffered and died in industrial accidents. 35,000 people died in the year 1914 alone as a result of industrial accidents. That's more than the number of people who die in wars, and so on. And the reason for this is there's a reason for it, and it's simply because I thought that learning history the way we did, that everything is done by heroes and saviors and founding fathers and Supreme Court justices and wise men in Congress and so on, and great industrialists and inventors, is profoundly anti-democratic. It leaves the citizenry a passive body waiting for somebody to do things for them. And I wanted people to understand that when things are done, yes, it's done by ordinary people. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I don't feel it's free to speak now, but I wanted to, first of all, comment that you mentioned throughout your talk tonight that the more power you have, the more free you are to speak. Freedom of speech comes to power. Do you see any difference between those 8 years you served at the African American College in the South to your position now as far as your own freedom of speech goes? And then after that, also, could you comment on what you see as alleviating the situation today, the constraints that face freedom of speech? Because what I guess I'm commenting on is the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are. So if you're like a young professor, such as you were at the Black College, were you as free with your comments then as you are now, that you're most of the time, I'm sure you're tenured at Boston University.
Or else I would be
Quite
dead.
well known. Is there a difference? And then also, how do you see alleviating the constraints, especially the more vulnerable, or the powerless field today as far as freedom of speech goes?
Constraints particularly on teachers. Thinking particularly about that.
Take that as an example. Or in the university.
Well, university. Freedom of speech in the university, freedom of speech on the part of vulnerable teachers. And, when I was, as you described me, a young, struggling faculty person, I know it's implied in your statement that when you're young and struggling and you don't have tenure, you're not as free to speak as later on, right, when you have tenure and a step, and so on. However, I'm not saying this to declare myself a hero of free speech or anything, but when I began to teach, I made up my mind, and I didn't know much about tenure, no tenure, you know. You have to go through a long period of education, right, before you learn what tenure is, and so on. But when I first started the speech, I made up my mind already that I would speak my mind in the classroom. I didn't come into the academic world straight from an academic life, you know. Before I started teaching, before I even went to college, I was a shipyard worker for 3 years. I was in the Air Force. I was a bombardier. I was in combat. I worked at various jobs. I entered college as a freshman at the age of 27. I started to teach in my 30s. By the time I was teaching, I knew that I wasn't going to be silent. I had very strong opinions about what was going on in the world, strong opinions about the class structure in the United States as a result of my background, strong opinions about war and peace as a result of my military experience, strong experiences about a lot of things as a result of reading history. And I guess I was just lucky that I survived. Really lucky, because the academic world, which is presumably freer than any other place, right? It's not, of course, we know that. The academic world is like any other place. There's power exercise. And academicians are particularly clever. Administrators, department heads, even your colleagues are very clever at inventing reasons why you shouldn't get tenure or shouldn't get reappointed, reasons which seem to have no tinge of politics to them, but which really behind the scenes are permeated with politics. So I barely made it. I was fired from my first job at Spelman College. I haven't told you my firing history yet, you see. But the truth is, if you want to exercise freedom of speech, you have to take risks. If you're not willing to take risks, you've given up your freedom of speech. If you begin to think that the most important thing in your life is to hold on to the present job that you now have, then you have given up your freedom. Now, I'm not therefore suggesting that people take wild and crazy and risks. There's always a certain guerrilla warfare you play with the system. I agree, and everybody makes compromises, and I undoubtedly made compromises, but I do believe you have to take risks. I took risks when I was at Spelman College, and now fortunately when I was involved in the civil rights movement, I was involved in the civil rights movement in a black college with a black president, although he didn't like the fact that I was joining the students in sit-ins and demonstrations, didn't like a faculty member doing that, couldn't say anything about it, because, well, it wouldn't look good for a black president to fire a white faculty member for being part of the civil rights movement. So he didn't. However, when the students came back out of jail, came back to the campus, and turned their attention to the college administration and said, we don't want to be treated like children anymore. We don't want to be patronized. We don't want to be controlled. We don't have to sign in and sign out. We don't want to have compulsory chapel 6 times a week. We want to be able to go out on dates before, really. And they rebelled. And I supported them. Well, that was it. Then I was fired. When I came to Boston University, I got tenure through. How I got tenure is too crazy a story, you see. I won't tell it to you, except that I barely got tenure because I became active in the anti-war movement as soon as I got to Boston University. I didn't have tenure when I first came, and then, although I had tenure, the president of Boston University tried to fire me and 4 other faculty members, because we had a faculty strike in 1979 at Boston University. There was a secretary strike. The faculty contract finally was settled. Faculty went back to work. Secretaries were still out on strike. Some of us decided we did not want to go back to work while the secretaries were still on strike. We would not cross their picket lines. So we held our classes out on the street rather than cross their picket lines. I held my class, I had a class of 200 people. I held it on Commonwealth Avenue, which is a big, those of you who know Boston, it's a big street in Boston. And, I rented a little loudspeaker system, I still haven't been repaid for that. I'm very indignant. And so the president of Boston University, who I described to somebody at dinner as the Saddam Hussein of higher education, brought us, the five of us, up on charges to fire us, although all five of us had tenure. Well, there was a big outcry and so on, and it wasn't followed up. But let me just say this. I didn't mean to give you all that personal history, except that you gave me a little opening for all of that. Let's say this. The academic world is a world where power and deception operate in order to threaten people's jobs, and you really need a union. You need to organize. You need to stick together. Faculty people have to support one another. Students have to support faculty people. The real power in the university is the students. If the students don't do what they're told, then the university comes to a standstill. The students in the university are like the workers at the Ford Motor Company. If the workers stop producing automobiles, Ford, as powerful and rich as he is, has to eventually give in. And so it's very hard in the academic world to organize faculty, to organize students, very hard. And I mean, I can tell you lots of stories about the hypocrisy of the academic world and how people do not get tenure for political reasons, or people are fired for political reasons, or people don't have contracts renewed for political reasons, although they never come out and say so. Yes?
First question, was that Silver? Was he president then, or was that
At Boston University. Yeah, the president was, is, and forever will be John Silver. Yes.
My question, and now it's this one. I would appreciate if you expand on your comments about media, because the implication there, I guess, is that the media purposely will protect the government and the establishment and so forth. And I wonder if you're saying that, if you're saying that they're lazy. My impression is that in recent years, the most significant thing that's happened in media is that corporate accountants have taken over the media. The investigative reporting is not a profitable enterprise and so forth, but then the main problem with media right now is the bottom line. It's not
Profit.
profit. Yeah, because
No.
I think diversity of media, and they'll go with almost any story they stumble onto. It's just that they're not digging them up where they have the past.
But the media have always been primarily interested in profit, right? People who start newspapers are rarely people who start newspapers simply for the purpose of educating the public,
I think the
right?
emphasis has changed.
But you're probably right in that it's gotten worse. And also there's been more conglomerates formed and more mergers of power. You know, General Electric owns NBC, and there are all these interlocking connections, and in that sense, yes, the media has become more and more powerful and more subservient to government. Shall we just take?
Just one more question.
Okay, last question.
You give any examples why the freedom of speech is not fully exercised. I would like to add one more. Freedom of speech makes sense only if you have something worth saying. And in a sort of mindless culture, in a society in which people are really not expected to say fresh thoughts, freedom of speech is meaningless. So in order to sustain it, we first have to create conditions in which people have something worth saying, something worth protecting, which means something which is non-traditional or controversial or fresh or innovative. And in this university occasion, actually, lately I've heard a number of expressions of will by people that offensive speech should be banned. You must have heard this. Protect, tender people from offensive statements. And invariably, these statements threatening free speech come from people who have least had a need for free speech. People who, by dint of their own creativity or their own personality, have never need to say something which will be protected, who have not had controversial thoughts or innovative thoughts. So because we're in the university here, we are supposed to create the need for free speech, not just to exercise. Comment on that.
Well, Did you hear what he said? Huh? No. Well, he's talking about the freedom of speech is meaningless unless they have something creative and important and new and original and vital to say. And then he was talking about the people who exercise their free speech in ways that are offensive to other people, and suggesting that the people who utter this offensive speech are people who perhaps for the first time are thinking ingenious thoughts or creative. Have I got you right?
Those who would like to ban offensive speech
Yes.
are those who least appreciate
Oh.
the need for free speech because they have not had the unpopular or innovative or disgusting thoughts themselves.
Well, I'm not. I'm not sure about the motives of the people who want to ban this free speech. But I will agree that we need. Sure, we'd like speech to be. We don't want just racist innovative speech, but all sorts of innovative speech, I myself am not inclined to ban speech, however repulsive it is. But I think you have a basic point about, the need for people to think fresh thoughts. If people think fresh and new thoughts, some of these fresh new thoughts are going to be odious, and others will not be. But there's a kind of faith that if people become free and creative, that the ones with good values will have a natural force of their own. Well, thank you. Would you like some?
I'd just like to remind you that there is a reception over there following this, and we also, the Institute is continuing this week. Tomorrow, it's the Rights of the Accused with Alfredo Parrish at 12 noon in the Pioneer Room in the Memorial Union.